All right. Welcome to both of you right now, and glad you're here. So, what's where are you from, both of you? Donna, Jamie, you can unmute. I think you're able to do that on your own.
I'm in the Indianapolis area.
Okay.
I'm up north in Chesterton.
Yeah. Okay. Glad you're both here. 4 o'clock is a tough time to get on. It seems like. I don't know. I'm reflecting back to when I was in a school, elementary school, as an administrator, even as a teacher. It's tough to get away at that time. So I appreciate you being here. And as some people may join us, they did last night. They kind of came in as they could. So I appreciate that. This is going to be, obviously, with just a couple of us, very interactive. And this is really a chance for you to ask questions. Tell me, to begin with, what you already know about multiple tiered systems of support. You can both unmute and just chit chat, actually.
So at my school, I am the senior director for student intervention. So I oversee MTSS for both behavior and academic side of it. I'm pretty well versed in the behavior side of the world and learning more in the academic side, although the systems seem to be up and running right now, even though this is their first real year of like pushing MTSS.
Okay. I think did you start that last year, Jamie, or the year before? It was pretty recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was last year we started that switch.
Okay, and did you change superintendents this year?
No.
Okay. I can't keep track of those in the region who change and who don't.
Yeah.
But I did know it was pretty recent.
Yes.
That you started. Donna, how about you in Indy?
No, I think you have us flip-flopped. I'm up in the region.
You're up in the region. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you change?
No, we did not. So I would just say that our circumstances are fragmented. So we are working on building some alignment across systems and schools for how we approach MTSS. So it's more about the practices in place and how we will, utilize some fidelity to ensure that we have those practices in place across all buildings.
And that focus is important. We're going to talk about actually both of what you've talked about today. And I want this to be I like having two. I just almost wish it was two person so we could really look at one more person is coming in. So we could really look at look at you and get into meaningful conversation. So I think Faith just joined us. Welcome. Faith, this is going to be a very interactive. There are just a few of us on, so you're welcome to unmute and join in. What we're going to talk about today, or what you'll learn, is essentially that we talk about acronyms, MTSS. We use the letters PLC. We use those, and I hear people say, "Oh, we're doing MTSS, we're doing PLCs." Actually, we don't do MTSS. We don't do PLCs, quote unquote. They are frameworks. They're part of a framework that is a system. It's basically what we do. It's the way we behave. It drives our behavior. It is a framework based on our beliefs. Both of those, professional learning communities and the MTSS framework that we have, they're really one and the same. They're kind of hand. So we're going to talk about how those fit together, or what those look like when they're put together. You're welcome. We're also going to talk about how they go together. PLCs, MTSS, we don't just do those. They actually are part of a framework that work together. And then why and how effective collaboration is essential for both if we're going to have a focused instruction and meaningful support for students that actually makes a difference. easy to get fragmented. So we're going to talk about how that what that effective collaboration looks like within this framework of MTSS / PLC. And we'll talk about that / in a minute, what I really mean by that. And then how structured collaboration. First was effective collaboration, how structured collaboration. It's effective because it's structured, focuses on the standards and student performance data to improve student learning. So that's what we're going to dive into today. We could talk about these PLCs and MTSS all week and still not come to a complete consensus. But if you would look, and when I look over here, if you have my my image up, I'm actually looking at a bigger screen for my eyes. So if you would, just take a look at that stem and finish that sentence with the most accurate response. If you want to share out, you're welcome to do so. Again, I prefer that you unmute and share out rather than the chat. There are only a few of us here. Any takers? System of planning instruction, go.
Yeah, I feel like it's number 4, an ongoing process that impacts the structure and culture of a school.
Okay, number 4. Anybody else?
Agree.
You agree, number 4?
Yep.
Actually, you're both correct. Why are the other 3 not? What about the other 3 don't fit that idea of a professional learning community?
I think number 1 doesn't work because a system for planning instruction, it should be the response to the data of moving forward within the PLC. So you're using the data to drive what the instruction is going to look like. And this is just like a system for planning instruction. So that rules out number 1.
Okay.
Also, number 1 is only specific to grade level, which doesn't create a culture within an entire school.
Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, I was agreeing with both of them, just thinking that I like each one of those, 1, 2, and 3, but they're not all encompassing.
You're actually, I mean, you're all correct, or on target. Those first 3 really fit into that number 4. It's not just, as you said, a grade level or a subject area. It is for planning instruction, but it's using the data to react to what we find from that data, the data to react then to what we find in that data to make a difference. It's not just for PD, but it is critical part of determining PD. And it's certainly just in and of itself, when a professional learning community is in place, that culture is positive. When an effective PLC is in place. So all 3 of those first 3 really do lend themselves to PLCs, but number 4 is more accurate because it's an ongoing, it's a reiterative process, or iterative process, easy for me to say at 4 o'clock, that really forms the culture of the school through that effective structure. And speaking of structure, it is, as I said, hand in glove with what a multi-tiered system of support is. So take a look at this. Same thing, this sentence stem and those 4 responses, and see which one's most accurate.
Number 2 would be my choice, the framework that supports all students. It's all inclusive. We're looking at everyone's ability, everyone's needs.
I agree with that.
Okay. You're actually both correct. Number two is essentially because it is a framework for all students. And it's not preliminary or primarily academics. And we talked about that when we mentioned behavior. It's actually behavior, social, emotional, or mental wellness and academics. It's not something that you add to a PLC. Like I said, they are hand in glove and they mesh very well in what you see within those frameworks, those structures. And it's certainly not just for students with special needs. So the well, when I try to advance it on my there we go. You're probably familiar with the triangle. Most people are. That's how you see MTSS or at MTSS normally. One of the first things you see, and we have three. It's common to see the three tiers. So just let somebody in. What you don't see, or what we don't see here, is the fact that those tiers, that universal being the core in academics, it's that core instruction at using the essential standards, or all standards actually, but it's that core instruction for all students. Targeted, some students may need additional support. At the universal level, we are differentiating. We are meeting the individual needs and differences of students. However, sometimes a student is really struggling within just a part of a lesson. It can be something that's very simple that differentiation doesn't quite take care of. So it may take a little bit more time to clarify that with just one aspect of a math concept, or it may be a small group that meets over a period of time with a target or with an idea of exiting them, making sure that they become proficient in what they are not understanding or cannot do, and they can exit that. It's one thing we don't see in tier two that's going to be covered in the next session that we have. It's going to be looking at tier two and what exactly is that. And then of course the intensive. These are not, this is not a linear approach or a linear progression. A child comes in kindergarten and kicks over the desks and starts spitting on people the first day. We're not going to provide the, okay, here's how we do things. We're not going to teach the behaviors with that child. We're not going to collect data. We're going to go right to, at that point, the intensive. That is where you're doing some quick triage with the other students and getting that student what they need. So it generally will follow that in academics, that progression from 1 to 3, but not necessarily. And also those tiers are not fixed. We serve, I guess we serve the student, the best way to put it, we serve the student, not the tier. Our focus is on the student, not the tier. And that includes when they are like trying to advance that. It includes when it goes beyond just the academics. And I think it was, who was it that mentioned behavior? Carol, was it you?
It was me. It was Jamie. I do behavior and academic MTSS.
Yes. Because those are not siloed. A behavior, a biologist back in the 90s, it was actually the decade of the brain. And out of that, science of reading actually took off with the No Child Left Behind in the National Reading Reading Panel study that took off. So science of reading is not new. But Bob Sylvester said, emotion drives attention and attention drives learning. When you look at these three domains up above, we remember that they are not siloed. A child coming in with emotional issues, and it can be just being upset over something that's home on a day, or it can be a more long-lasting, more maybe even a chronic mental wellness concern, an emotional concern. That's going to affect the behavior. It will affect the academics. Conversely, academics struggling with academics can affect behavior and mental wellness. So the point is they are not siloed. By looking at this graphic, and you can see within that graphic the marks I have, just representative of at any given time, students can be wherever within that gradient or that gradual move from 1 to 3 and back again. Students can be at any point in that triangle, so to speak, and receiving the supports necessary, academics, behavioral, or for their mental wellness. One of the keys to making that effective is to be sure that, for example, universal, we teach in academics, we teach a concept, we teach a skill. In behavior, we teach behavior, we teach what's expected, we reinforce what's expected. We clarify to children with immediate feedback when they're not doing something, they're doing something they should not. We whisper in their ear, hey, remember, we walk in the hall, stating it positively. And same with mental wellness. When a child comes in and we immediately notice there's something going on, if we have taught self-regulation, if we've taught students how to understand themselves, hopefully that child would come to us and say, hey, I really got some things going on today. I'm okay. I just need some space. Where they can self-regulate, they have that metacognitive ability and skills to regulate how they're feeling so they can attend academically, so they can restrain themselves behaviorally. So that graphic is essentially to understand that those are not siloed. Academic behavior and mental wellness are not siloed. The tiers are gradients. They flow up and down gradually with different levels of being targeted with support, different levels of intensive intervention, and even different levels of universal instruction using differentiation. Reflection on that? I really would like to hear your thoughts on that. Or questions. Okay. So MTSS essentially is MTSS and PLCs are a framework. They're a structure that is ongoing, and it's a process. It's a structure with that ongoing process that lays a foundation for and supports with that ongoing process, ongoing supports for the structure and the culture of the school. MTSS, PLCs, these together, this framework requires the right people. We have to have the right people involved. Take a look at these quadrants. 1, 2, and 3. Take a moment just to read over those. And as you do, think of your team at grade level, your subject area team, your school, and in your mind, select the best or the most accurate quadrant for your school or grade level. Okay. You can remain anonymous if you'd like, so you're not putting this out there for everybody, but I promise you're among friends. Anyone want to volunteer?
I think I manage and work with 4 schools. And while we are striving and pushing our directors of student support to work together and like phone a friend, as you would say, I think we're very much in the parallel play bucket.
Okay. It's kind of a safe bucket to be in, actually. I can see why people do that. Others? Parallel play, you picture children on a beach One's building a sandcastle, the other one's digging a hole and letting the water fill it up. And they're not doing anything wrong. In fact, they're actually making progress what they're doing. They're just not connecting, and they really don't know or care. And they care maybe, but don't know what the other person's doing, not paying attention to it. That number two is dangerous, and that's where culture is essential. When you have subtle, or the very subtle undermining of another teacher, or just that competition, not friendly competition, but competition that it is again intended to reduce your colleague's effectiveness and therefore harm the students. That's the most dangerous. Collegial, by ignorance, kind of in number one, the parallel play, not understanding what the others are doing. You can be very congenial. Go out on Fridays with your colleagues, your other teachers, go out, meet somewhere for a dinner. You might even vacation with other people. But when it comes to those important educational issues and working together in a structured format, not happening. I see there are a lot of threes out there as well. And then of course, collegial, that is where that cooperative, focused cooperative, and how can I best say it? You're focused, intentional is the word I was trying to think. You're focused, intentional, and cooperative collaboration is where the most effective instruction and learning occurs. All right. Not only do we want to look at those four and think about where we are, but let's think about what it takes to become that quadrant four. First of all, looking yourself in the mirror as a team. When I look at myself in the mirror, I'm not always flattered by what I see, not always happy with what I see. But we have the courage to objectively look at that reality in our school, and not only look at the reality, but understand that may be where we are at the time, but it should not define us. We don't have to stay here. When I look at myself, I don't have to stay there. I can comb my hair. I can brush my teeth. I can put on a shirt that is not too tight or whatever. So we have that courage to look, but we also have hopefully the wisdom and the faith in ourselves and our colleagues to realize that's not where we're stuck. If it's something that bothers us when we look at that objectively, our current station. We have a shared vision. We have those shared aspirations. JFK in 1961, John F. Kennedy, when he was speaking to Congress, that is when he said, I have a vision, or we have a vision that America, by the end of this decade, will send a person to the moon and bring them back successfully. That's a vision. And when you have those aspirations, you can look at yourself, have the courage, and assess your current reality, not necessarily be pleased with it, but then you have the aspirations, the vision to make that different. In this case, student success. And not only do you have the vision, but you have the shared commitment. Among the colleagues, you are rowing the boat together in the same direction. You know where you want to go. And in this case, you're focusing on student success and safety, for example. And you're committed to that in everything that every decision you make as a team and individually is focused on, in this case, as I use the example, student safety and student learning. So you have that collective commitment. You also have vulnerability-based trust, which means when I'm at my most vulnerable, I can trust that you as a teammate, you as a fellow teacher will not take advantage of that. And trust is the most, or mistrust, lack of trust, is the most often ingredient of teams being ineffective and not working well together or being successful, in this case in a school. And then mutual expectations and mutual support. Those expectations are clear to each other. We have that shared understanding of what those expectations are. We work interdependently, which means we work independently, but we also work interdependently, which means we are doing what we do together. For example, lungs and heart. They have different functions as body systems, but they have to do what they're doing well. So when they work together, AKA carrying carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream and ingesting or pulling in the oxygen, you have that interrelationship. So to have that, then you have to have mutual expectations and mutual support. Mutual expectations would be you come to a collaborative session, you're going to collaborate with your team and you don't have your data. In a true professional learning community, where we tend to think of those as being those collaboration sessions, although again, that's really MTSS as well. But when you look at those team sessions, let's say you're going to look at your data and adjust instruction. If I don't have mine, it's not the principal. Once that culture is in place, it's not the principal who oversees that. Your team members, your colleagues will say, "Hey, John, you know what? You didn't bring your data today. What's going on?" I mean, normally you do that. What, is there something going on? Because now you're going to support me, but you're also making it clear that we're going to have our data. That's our norm. That's our expectation. I'm going to support you. What's going on? Is there anything I can do for you right now? So mutual expectations, high expectations, and mutual support. That is what happens within that purposeful collaboration. Not only do you have those personal requirements, but you have structural requirements for effective and purposeful collaboration. You have time dedicated. That's a scheduling thing. You have time dedicated, I guess a sufficient amount of time dedicated to collaboration and providing those supports and intervention. The conversations within those teams are structured, and they're structured about instruction and student data. That's academically. Behaviorally, it would be about instruction, because again, core one, that universal tier, we're teaching students behavior. Disciplia, which is the Latin root for discipline, means to learn. So we're teaching those behaviors. And again, we have that collective commitment, that collective understanding, shared understanding of what our school will become and what it should look like now, what the culture should be. So we're talking about how we're instructing students in all three of those domains. And we're doing it in a way in which our agenda is set. We're doing it in a way that we have norms, so we stay on point and on focus during that time. We also have consistent monitoring. And that monitoring is something, again, we have a system in place. So we're monitoring student learning. We're monitoring student behavior. We're monitoring their mental wellness. Is there something going on? Let's say there's been a tragedy, unfortunately, at a school. We're consistently monitoring and monitoring student well-being, emotional well-being, and doing what we must do as colleagues within our grade, outside of our grade, or our subject level to affect that in a positive way. And then also we have that individual and collective staff growth. We talked about in one of those definitions, it was professional development was mentioned. We have to have the expectation that individually and collectively, we will grow to improve the outcomes for students, to improve the safety, to improve the learning, the academic success. We have an individual and a collective understanding of what growth should be for ourselves and our team, as well as a commitment to that. Not only the right people, but doing the right work. It's really counterproductive to have an amazing team of teachers. You and your colleagues are on fire. Professionally, you've got it. I mean, your technique, your content knowledge is all there, but you're teaching different content, different skills, different processes, procedures, knowledge. What you're teaching is not what students must learn. So doing the right work is essential, and that right work enables us to have clarity and focus toward our vision of the student success. So Rick DeFore in PLC at Work, he was a principal in the 90s in Adlai Stevenson High School, Illinois, and he is the one credited really with pioneering a PLC at Work model, which is actually a trademark model. But that process, PLC process, and he has 5 questions. I've added a second question after number 1. But what must students know and be able to do? That's your curriculum. The Indiana academic standards set forth what students must know and be able to do. Our curriculum, hopefully, we have curriculum guides that pull those standards apart. So it's not the standard, but lessons or target objectives, target learning objectives are part of that standard. We can't teach a whole standard, most of them. We cannot, we have to pull those apart into specific content knowledge and skills. So there has to be clarity on what must these students know and be able to do today, this hour, tomorrow, because we're going to lead up to that. So how will we prepare them for what they must do tomorrow? It has to be crystal clear. What must they know and be able to do? We also, as we're planning what must they know and be able to do, we are also planning our assessments. Assessments aren't written or aren't developed after we instruct. Those are developed before we instruct to match what must they know and be able to do. How am I going to know that? Well, we're going to know it because if this amount of rigor, if this proficiency level and the amount of knowledge that they retain, whatever the expectations are for them to know and be able to do will be measured with a parallel assessment of that. The bridge in the middle, and this is what I added to Rick DeFore's model. In the middle is how will I design the instruction? So to pull that curriculum, to pull that assessment together, the bridge is learning. That learning is what happens. Learning occurs when, number one, we have the content knowledge. Number two, we have the instructional skills. And number three, we work collectively and collaboratively to drive that learning, to drive that positive behavior, to drive that positive culture for mental wellness. So that alignment is you have to have it. It's foundational, and that must be in place. Questions on, I know I might have prolonged that. Maybe I was confused or a little confusing when I stated that. Give me feedback on that, what your thoughts are. I know I just went through a lot, but questions? Okay, looks like you have it. I see a thumb up. I appreciate that. It gives me some. That's one thing about the webinar. I need feedback. I like looking at people walking around the room, talking, questions come up. So bear with me as I try to struggle through the virtual. They aren't bad, but it's not the same. Okay, so that alignment begins with clarity. Caroline Tomlinson in the 90s she still is active, University of Virginia. But in the 90s, she was really known for being the guru behind differentiation. And in her book, her first book, this is a quote. You take a look at that. If you would, do you see that? What stands out about what you're reading there, what she said, and what you're seeing at your school? Can you compare the two and share that with us?
I can share a little bit about instruction right now is actually something we are focused on at our school. We are having a lot of behavior issues, and a lot of what we're seeing when we go and do those observations and walkthroughs in the classroom are the types of activities that we're seeing that are just not engaging. Or on the opposite end of that, just taking rather than using our materials as a resource, we're just page flipping. Again, you don't see engagement with that, and then behavior begins.
And that page flipping, I would assume, without having the data, may come from that lack of clarity.
Right, we don't know our standard, so we're not starting necessarily with our standard first. We're just allowing our resource to be the teacher, the expert. And then on top of that, we're not meeting student needs. you know, from different, at various levels. So and then because that comes back to planning, right? So our planning, if we're not planning and understanding, then we're just giving a lesson and it's falling apart.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Do you pronounce it Farrell or
Farrell.
Farrell?
Farrell,
Okay.
yep,
Yeah, Farrell, thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome.
Others?
We see the same kind of thing. However, like our phonics curriculum is scripted, so a lot of our teachers feel like they can just walk in and read from the script that day. And when you really have to dive into and know and internalize the lesson to know the outcomes, so we struggle with that, which then leads to teachers not having their exemplars or unable to know what that big outcome of the day is supposed to be from each lesson. And the same goes for our ELA and math instruction as well. They're all scripted programs, which really does not help us at all.
Yeah. Yeah, Jamie, think of me reading these slides to you and asking questions and then moving on. Scripted is good, it helps, especially for new teachers, but it's telling when they don't have that content knowledge, the clarity, those techniques to make that script come alive to the student. And that's where the engagement comes in with the students, because you can go beyond what's in the script and put yourself into that, what you know, both technique wise works with students and what you know content wise about having clarity about the subject. Script is okay, but that's, yeah. Thank you for sharing it.
And
Go ahead.
along with that, Jamie, I was just going to say that students understanding the essential ideas or principles at the bottom is going to be probably a depth of knowledge of level one. We're just not getting any further with that when we don't understand it ourselves. Nor do those scripted programs help with rigor.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. There's no
Also-
into it. It's very dry if you just read straight from the script.
Yeah.
I also
can-
think
Go ahead.
sometimes there's a disconnect with those scripted programs, because we can then also use a pre-designed assessment tool that comes with that program and think that that indicates student learning. It
Yeah.
indicates learning of the information that was presented, but not necessarily our goal for teaching.
The target objective, you'll see something in a minute about target objectives. That's spot on, Sheila. I appreciate that. I see, as I go out and work with schools, I see a lot of that. I see students on computer programs, and when I talk to the teachers, what are they doing? Well, let's say it's a math program. It's different ones are working at different places. The program, adjusts to them, and if they get it wrong, it tells them what they did wrong. And I ask the question, well, can they read what it tells them? How does it tell them? Well, sometimes if it has voice to text or text to voice or whatever, it will read it to them. It will explain it. But yeah, most of them, it just gives them another chance to do it. My question is, well, doesn't that give them another chance to make a mistake and reinforce the error if they don't understand it? Well, parents, grade reports. It tells me right where they are. Let me take a look. I'm anxious to see those. Well, they're kind of hard to get a hold of. They're hard to find and hard to print. And I just think the tail's wagging the dog here. You're the expert. You should be driving what's happening and use these resources as resources to extend and deepen what you're doing, what students must know and be able to do. And that's that center circle. That's why it's critical. Anyway, yeah, thank you for sharing that, for all that you've shared. Universal or tier one, what we're going to talk about today is essentially means that we're going to identify those essential skills and learning targets. What must students know and be able to do? We're going to design the instruction. That second question, how do I design the instruction and the environment so students learn? Notice I said environment there. Environment. I may have the best structured, the best enriched, developed, phenomenal lesson in front of me. I'm designing that instruction. But if chaos is in the room and I have no control, I haven't designed the environment to This is where you pick up things. I'm ready to go when I'm waiting on students because I'm ready to go. Let's begin. Boom, boom, boom. We're moving right into instruction. The design may be great, but we also have to design the environment to foster that understanding. And then developing those targeted assessments. And like I said before, your essential skills, when you look at that and you develop those learning targets, you are also developing how you will measure that learning. And then from those, you're developing your instruction. How will I now teach that so students do learn? Fourthly, those three really go together, those first three questions. Then, as part of that last one, then how do we analyze that learning data to go back into those first three and say, okay, what part of the essential skill did we not cover or not teach? I hate to say cover, did not teach, didn't teach effectively. Wow, what was it in those first, even the targeted assessments? When we're looking at our targeted assessments and we start analyzing that data, did the assessment really target or did it measure what we thought it would measure when we developed it? No, you're right. That was a bad question. So yeah, so we're developing those targeted assessments, those three to go together. We cannot forget that fourth one, which is analyzing the learning data. So we're going to talk, we're first going to look at the essential skills. And I'm going to share with you in a moment a video of a group of teachers at Jefferson Elementary in Middlebury, Indiana, and or Goshen, Indiana, Middlebury schools. We have these film clips or longer film clips with explanation on our website. So I think there are a series of 6. You're going to see clips from those in here. But as we look at those essential planning questions with the standards, we are clear on what a student must learn and be able to do. At what rigor, though, is that student expected to demonstrate that? And what knowledge going into that, knowledge and skills are needed? I would argue that when we develop that instruction, most teachers who have had experience really start to hopefully anticipate where those glitches will be. Oh yeah, when I teach improper fractions to mixed numbers, oh yeah, this is the one thing that they misunderstand. So when I'm planning that instruction, I am preempting that issue by explaining it differently, using multi-sensory learning manipulatives to overcome that, anticipating where that glitch will be. So what's the prerequisite knowledge and what knowledge is needed later? What must they know and be able to do coming into this as I design that instruction? What must I do then to establish that prerequisite knowledge for the next level, from third to fourth, etc.? How then, when will we teach it? Within this, I give you an example up here of learning targets. By the first, second, third quarter, an enduring standard might be first, second, third quarter. You might introduce an essential skill or components, learning targets from an essential skill in the second quarter, and then come back and revisit that third or fourth just briefly as reinforcement. But we want to know when exactly will we be teaching this throughout the year? And then how exactly will we measure that learning? Again, going back to those first 3 questions. This is from that school I told you about. And so take a look. And as you do so, I would like you to, going back to this slide, be thinking of how they used what's up here, the level of rigor, prerequisite knowledge and skills as she's explaining what they do.
It's super important to know your standards, especially when you teach. I would say the way most of us do, where everything is embedded into everything else. You know, I am teaching a lesson on setting a character, but we're also putting the story in sequential order, and we're talking about numbers first, second, third, fourth, which pulls into your math and you're stretching out the words, and that pulls in your decoding standard and encoding standard. You have to know how everything fits together, because you don't have time in your day to teach everything in isolation. So you have to figure out how to intertwine your standards cross subjects within the same subject. We talk about our standards all the time. What's priority? What's essential? What's foundational? What is an application standard? I'm on our kindergarten math committee for the district. She's on the kindergarten literacy committee for the district. So we're living those standards within those meetings. Can I tell you that it's KRN.32? No. But I can tell you that I have an ask and answer question, and my kids may be able to do that by the end of the year.
I think too, like, because we know what has to come next then.
Right.
And so with vertical articulation throughout the entire building, like, we know where they need to get in third grade, even down here at the kindergarten level. And so we have to up our rigor in order to get them ready for first. And the whole point of interventions is to close that gap. And so we don't have kids down here and kids up here. And then first grade's like, oh, what am I doing? And then it just either gets further apart. We're trying to close that gap as much as we can. And so, like, knowing the standards and breaking them down, because that's what a lot of our skill, I think we break them down a lot too, like where they're at, where they need to be. If they're not here, what do we do with, and I think by doing that and doing the planning and having the extra support throughout the building, and that's just it too, like, everybody's on board. Everybody's on board with the PLC process.
Reflection? I'm actually anxious to hear what your thinking is, what your thoughts are about that.
This probably sounds mean, but I think, I don't know. I mean, in my experience, that looks like a really good group of people going the extra mile. I don't know what percentage of the time that always happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sheila, and that's a great point. They're actually a PLC model school. They have been developing, and Tricia Brickner, the principal, will tell you we're never done since the early 2000s. So I don't know, 12, 13 years. They have been building this collaborative culture using, in this case, the PLC at Work framework, really focusing on that. But yeah, when you stop in, and they are open to anybody stopping in. Tricia will say, yeah, when you want to come, sure. Yeah, here's our schedule. She'll share their resources with others. Yeah. But when you stop in, you see this planning, and you're going to see another one later. So you see this going on, and they have a format, they have the agenda that they follow. They come prepared, and they look at the data, they discuss the assessment. It was accurate. Where's this student falling down? What do we now do with our own instruction? What do we do as far as helping the kids? Did I not model that correctly? Maybe they need scaffolding. What are your thoughts? Based on the data they have before them, and this was as they were getting ready to start their meeting when we filmed this, they focus on the student. What you don't hear is, or I've never heard there is, well, she's lazy, or, she just never does her work. You don't hear that. You hear a reflection on critiquing their own effectiveness as instructors, or what they did during that lesson. And you hear them talking about what we will do for the student, not to them or picking on them, so to speak, complaining about them. They are all focused on that student going to the next step. What do we need to do so that they do know, so they know and can do what is necessary in that standard? But yeah, Sheila, thank you. Like you said, I mean, like you noted, it's something that you will see there all the time, but Unless you've been working on it 12 to 15 years with a commitment like they have, it's pretty unique. Others?
Yeah, I think that if that's happening, it's top down. Everyone is invested. You can see that. And they are working smarter, not harder. I mean, their standards are identified. I mean, she had them broken down 4 different times. They know what's essential and what isn't. And that takes work, but it's a culture that has been created for them with a vision that everyone understands. And I think if you don't have that, then we see more of what Sheila's talking about. We've got the silos and we're always behind the 8 ball.
You mentioned culture. That is, there are teachers who have to drive there, teachers who've been there a long time, and the universal response to, have you ever thought about going to another district? Universal response is, oh no, never. Well, what you're doing is pretty hard work. I mean, you're really working hard. I know. And at first it is hard, but seeing the results and the culture, I wouldn't go anywhere else. But that was, again, built over time. So yeah, Jefferson Elementary it's actually in Goshen, just outside of Goshen. So that universal instruction is rooted in the Indiana academic standards. What must they know and be able to do? Not just the standard itself, but within that standard, holding out those learning targets. Learning targets are going to look at what must they know, what reasoning. A lot of times we look at what they must know and how they're going to show us. What we miss is the reasoning skills. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you find that answer? It is just as important to understand their thinking and teach the thinking as it is to teach the facts or the skill. And so the reasoning skills, and then looking at their performance, as we teach and as we assess, what performance is necessary, what's the evidence, and what product is necessary, what will they supply to us in performance or in product to show us that they've learned. The 2 standards that you see here, the first I think is a 6th grade math standard. I know the second one on the bottom is 11th and 12th grade ELA. What learning target would you see in, just pick one, in one of those, just a single learning target?
Well, a target might be for the second one, they've got to be able to identify figurative language in literature. Then you can move to meaning.
They can't analyze it unless they can identify it. They know what they're looking for. Yeah. Yep. And you notice that's not really in there per se.
It's not.
That quote at the bottom is so impactful because I think one of you mentioned the materials, the curriculum materials. Sheila, I think it might have been you. I'm not sure. But having those materials, in this case, we call it, it was very scripted. But if we have our own learning target, if we look at the standard and we develop our own learning target, or it's in our curriculum maps, this learning target's there. We've identified it. We've written it on the board for the students to understand. We have curricular materials. Our reading program or math program actually aligns with that learning target. In fact, it's actually suggested in the learning target. With that, evidence shows that instruction is not aligning to the learning target. Got the I can statement, have the materials. When I'm observing and I'm seeing what is being taught, it is not focused in on that learning target. When you go to the school that I showed you before, that learning target is always first and foremost in their minds, and they are focused on that work. When they instruct, the direct instruction, the explicit instruction that they provide is focused on that work. So we've looked at identifying the essential skills and designing that instruction, what that would look like, some of the pros and cons for that. But what about targeted assessments? We have to make sure, like I said before, that those assessments are targeted to and measure the content that they must know and be able to do. So to do that, we develop common formative assessments. Formative assessments, essentially what's happening every day. It can be on the fly with just a quick glance. Show me your hands if you understand. Holding up a paddle. There are a number of ways that you can develop or are just on the fly assessing student learning. Common formative assessments, however, are developed with your team, and they are, during that process, you're really digging into the standard itself. What must they know and be able to do? You're digging into that when you write those CFAs, those common formative assessments. So the difference being, of course, they're purposeful and they're done as a team, developed as a team based on the essential standards. When you have more heads, 2 heads are better than 1, you're putting that common formative assessment together, not at the expense or in place of, but in addition to those on the fly, hearing what a student responds, seeing what they write as you're walking through what they're doing in their practice, independent practice. So those are developed, those common formative assessments are developed through that learning team, that grade level team or subject area team getting together in a formal way and focusing on that standard and exactly what we want to teach that standard and then how we will assess that standard. You're going to see that team doing that right here. I don't think my screen changed yours. Hang on just a second. Well, it's a lot easier when these are embedded on your computer. I guarantee you that.
Our last meeting.
Can you see that?
Our focus right now
Okay.
is on
Apologize for that.
I think we should look at to see what we did last year and see how we can transition what we did last year to this year, but to address common core standards. The standards that we address like fractions and comparing fractions. We also need students to be able to identify the numerator, the denominator, as well as all the parts of a fraction. So let's look at last year's test. Yes, last year I know we didn't have the numerator denominator. Okay, so we need to add numerator and denominator for sure. I know that last year when they compare fractions, they only looked at pictures, so we need to make sure there's numbers when we're comparing fractions. There wasn't any open-ended questions on last year's test. Yeah. It's huge to really make sure that students are given the opportunity to demonstrate knowledge by writing their thoughts down. So maybe we should just transition to possibly looking at some of those tests. Yeah. So if you look at part 1, it's called the school garden. The 4th and 3rd grade classes at Jefferson Elementary School are planning a garden. Use the garden space below. Show how each class can have an equal section of the garden. And then that has 4 questions that go with it. And the students have to draw the picture and then write the fraction of the garden that each class planned. That fall under. That would fall under the 3 and F1. So we could definitely use that part. That is still part of part 2. So then on Wednesday, class planning should look at the intersection of the garden. Maybe before we get to that though, maybe to help address like the NF.3, the equivalent fraction, maybe we should ask them if 2/4 is equivalent to what fraction, but not saying that. Say A and B together also makes maybe what's another way we could what's another way we could write that fraction. Okay. So that way we could find 6 part A and part B. Yes. Okay. So
All right. Thoughts on that team planning their assessment based on their essential standards?
I think that goes back to what I was saying about, what they were doing in that video is completely different than giving the unit test at the end of a piece of curriculum. Completely different.
Great observation, Sheila. They're digging into the learning as it occurs and we go back to that other slide, complete clarity on what students must know and be able to do, and complete clarity through that collaborative process on how they will determine whether or not the students have learned. And use that data, that information, to drive subsequent instruction, whether it's supportive for the number of students or whether it's they have to reteach an entire lesson, or do, I guess, what you could say is a school-wide intervention.
It would also help reveal your curriculum choices that are completely inappropriate to meet your goals.
Those that get in the way, that's a great point. That's a great point. That's where that understanding, that clarity is so important. Thank you, Sheila. Any others? So we saw in the first clip, we saw a team, and she was explaining the clarity that they have in planning or identifying those essential standards and planning those. And that paper I showed you with the quadrants, those squares, they then, at the beginning of the year, they have a sense of where they're going to be, where they need to be. Sometimes, and they'll tell you this, they have to correct on the fly when things, no, they didn't really get this, let's say in 3rd grade. I remember they were talking about, for whatever reason, 2nd grade, we normally teach it here, but that 2nd grade standard, they're not showing, they lost it over the summer or something, but they're not ready for it. So you saw how that was developed, or how the essential skills were. Sorry about that. So those grayed out statements or grayed out bullet points, we saw number 1, how they were identifying, or the importance of identifying those skills, those learning targets, developing those learning targets from that, and designing that instruction, and then developing the targeted assessments. And again, those assessments are the direct result of what they must know and be able to do. They are also changed then with those targeted assessments can be changed. Those common formative assessments can be changed based on instruction. For example, we have the standard and we're designing that instruction, but then we realize that we're not the assessment or the assessment questions that we developed. Those aren't really, that question didn't really target what students truly must know. So in teaching, we discover, wait a minute, we have to go back and modify that question we're going to give them on that assessment at the end of the week, because now that I'm into this instruction, so you'll see the team meeting and talking about that, revising on the fly those assessments, because they realize up front, that's not really accurate. So, but that is that is structured and focused collaboration within that MTSS process of core instruction supports and intervention, and within the PLC, or the professional learning community process. So when we analyze the data that we get from those assessments, we're looking at patterns of misunderstanding, errors. So we're looking for those patterns. We're also going to, as I said before, look at questions that aren't that question didn't really measure what we thought it was going to measure when we developed that. They're going to reflect on their effectiveness during instruction. You know what? I did not model that. Did you model that? How did you model that? Or scaffolding. What kind of scaffolding did you provide for the students? Those questions come up during the analysis of data, and they're reflecting on their own instruction through studying the student data and analyzing that. So it's a mirror looking at ourselves and making sure that what changes we need to make in presenting that instruction on those assessments. It also identifies that level of support, that level of intervention, enrichment, whatever is needed for individual as well as groups of students. And then again, planning that subsequent instruction. So what do we need to teach now? So follow up to what we see on this common formative assessment. What must we do now? How are we going to teach that? Any ideas? And you talk about that. Okay, who specifically, what students need more intense instruction, additional supports? And from that, then you would see this team. Okay, so you're going to have that group of 5. Excellent. So, okay, I'll take that. I'll take those 14. And they are clear on who's going to do what, how they are going to respond to that data, respond in their own using their own instructional strategies that they reflected on, and putting the students where they need to be put for that additional support and planning that support. Here's an example of what they might look at. Let's say questions 1, 2, and 3 above those columns. Let's say those are questions that pertain to one aspect of what students must know. And let's say 4, 5, 6, and 7 pertain to how they demonstrate that. Let's say a math problems, fractions. Questions 1, 2, 3 pertain to what they know about the fractions. 4, 5, 6, and 7 in solving a problem using that knowledge. So this is a common formative assessment. It was given. The students are on the left. There are 6 of them, and the check marks indicate those. For that question, that student showed proficiency. If you were analyzing this data with your team, what observations can you make? For example, question number 2, 33% of the students showed proficiency on that. And those were the students who, Elena, that's 100%, understanding all of it. And Lucas, 86%, he understood all of it. But there are still 4 that missed that. My question is, did that question measure what we thought it was going to measure? So when you look at Dea's work, when you look at what Lucas wrote down, or Martina wrote down, or how she responded, what Sean, the answer that he gave, question 2, maybe that didn't measure what we thought it was going to measure, despite the fact that 2 students got there. So that when I talk about analysis, that's what I'm thinking about. So your reflections on any of the other questions or student performance with respect to those questions.
Question 2, couldn't that also just reflect that particular content wasn't appropriately taught?
Yes. Taught, and maybe the curriculum alignment wasn't there. If they didn't pre-assess to see how the students were doing going into that instruction, or what they knew and didn't know during that to come into that instruction, it could be a missing background knowledge or prerequisite skills, in addition to, or as you mentioned, just instruction itself. Yeah, so we're looking at what came before, what came after, how I did as a teacher. What else? Thanks, Sheila. If you were going to put students in groups for support or enrichment, who would you group together?
Drake and Martina.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at common gaps between students for groupings.
Yeah. And depending on the question itself too, that may influence who you put in that group.
Right, without being actually able to see what the questions are like.
Yeah.
Because it could be Elena, Lucas, and Martina could be placed in a group, just depending on what that fifth question was.
Yeah. One of the mistakes we tend to make, I shouldn't say tend to make, that I have seen is students, when we look at words correct per minute and we start grouping young children in that words correct per minute, and we just look at the score instead of looking at doing an error analysis. Is it initial blends? Is it vowel teams? Is it multisyllabic words? So digging deeper into the why is important.
When I look at this chart, the way,
I got it.
oh, sorry. When the way I would analyze that fundamentally would be my totals across the bottom. If I have outliers like that 33%, I
Mhm.
would say that that's an instructional problem versus on the right-hand column, when I see like a 43% performance by a student, that might be a broader, cognitive or some other kind of problem that's more student-based than instructional.
Mhm. That is a fantastic observation and analysis of the way to use this tool. In this, I think it's the next video coming up, you're going to see a team from that school reflect on scores that they have given during a common formative assessment. And as you're speaking, the first time I watched this, I thought, what happens if you've not heard them or been in the room with them during that entire collaborative session to see what they mean? Because as you hear them, they'll be talking, it seems like they're just popping around back and forth with that. That's how did you teach? How did you teach? And it can become kind of confusing as you look at it for the first time. But when you really listen to them, you see that they're focusing on the questions themselves, the student's response to those questions and possible misunderstandings, whether it's a misunderstanding that is on that student that we must correct or a misunderstanding in the way we taught it. They're looking at their own instructional effectiveness. So let's look at this team. Can you hear that? It's low.
Question. Five most missed questions. Yeah. Which is do you? I think yeah. Yeah. That was right. Yeah. Yeah. I think they have. Yeah. Right.
John, just so you know, I can't hear a bit of that video. It's very broken and there's really not much sound.
Thank you. Let me pull it up, see if I can pull it up online. Can you hear that? You can't hear that still?
No, and it might be that my signal's bad here as well.
No, Jamie's not hearing it either.
No, barely hear it.
What I will do is you'll have, let me go back to my yeah. Let me stop that real quick. Okay.
Story, which it wasn't on slideshows.
Yes, that's what I'm. So
Can you see my tier 1 assessment screen now?
No.
Boy, I am just at 0 here all of a sudden. Hang on just a second. Share my screen. Can you see that now?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to that last slide. You will have access to this slide. So I really urge you to watch their meeting and listen again and listen to their conversation in light of what we've talked about with collaboration, looking at assessments, those common formative assessments, analyzing that common formative assessment with respect to their own practices, instructional practices, as well as the students themselves. So I apologize for that. I'm not sure why that was not louder.
so
All right, can you see that screen now?
Yes. Tier
We
1.
good? Yeah, are we good? Thank you. Universal assessments, and we're about done. Universal assessments tell us who, they do not tell us why. So universal assessments are good at determining who has and who has not reached a benchmark. The diagnostic tells us why they did not reach it. The universal is given to all students, NWEA, iReady, those are given to all students to get that overall understanding of where students are. Again, without the why. When we provide the diagnostics, we're then digging into those select students who were identified for the universal. The universal also estimate the overall achievement. It's a broad estimate of the achievement, and it's only given several times a year, 3 times a year, for example. That's the universal. The diagnostic is specific to content and skills, knowledge and skills that they must know and be able to do. Universal, again, just given those few times a year, and then a diagnostic is also then given as a screener. It is to determine whether or not, during progress monitoring, for example, to determine whether or not they have an understanding, a proficient understanding of what they must know and be able to do. And then universal is good for informing the grouping, the need for groupings. Diagnostic is going to tell us what the structure of that grouping, who's going to be in it, and what the focus of that group will be, that grouping will be. So again, universal, necessary, diagnostic, just as necessary to go along with that universal. when you're analyzing your core instruction, tier 1, at least 80% of the students must meet or exceed grade level expectations. I really caution schools not to get into that 80-20 dilemma or that 80-20 trap. By that, I mean, well, as long as at least 80% of our students, we can aim higher than that. It's not always going to be the 20%. It's not always going to be the 80%. It's about percentages to guide us, but it's more about specific students and what they know and can do and our instruction related to that learning. So 80-20, there's a thing called the 80-20 dilemma. We just want to make sure that that doesn't define or confine us to being complacent or being accepting, okay, we got 80%, we can move on. Just want to throw that out there because I hear 80-20 a lot, and it's good. It's a good guideline, but it should not be the ceiling. At least 95% of the students who are proficient in the fall, are they still meeting expectations in the spring? In other words, does instruction at that grade level or in that subject, is it moving them along so that those 80%, at least the students who were there at the beginning of the year, 95% of those are still on target to meet expectations at the end of the year and ready to go on to the next year, or something lacking in our instruction. At least 80% of the students at grade level without adding additional supports. And there's not a gap or not a significant gap between student groups in meeting those expectations. And lastly, the rate of our identified students for special education is below the state average. If you have 40% of the more students not meeting the minimum expectations, it really should be you really should have a class-wide intervention. To clarify that, I'm not talking about 80% of the or 40% of the students in a unit. I'm talking about 40% of the students for a learning target. Now, it can be more than that if they're really struggling. With this learning target, that part of the standard that we have confined ourselves to and we are teaching at this point, students, over half of the students are not understanding. I'm going to present that to everybody. I cannot provide supports, intervention for that 60% or more. And we know when this happens, that class-wide intervention happens, even students who are in that 40% or 50% or whatever are understanding and actually exceeding. They are not harmed, but actually provide, it fortifies their understanding, but they actually provide support for other students as well in their conversation if you have an interactive room. So again, that 40% class-wide intervention does not mean it's confined to, or it's pertains to a unit, but it is confined to that specific skill, what the students must know and be able to do. So talked about MTSS and professional learning communities, and we know that in a framework, they work together to provide that success for students. And so success not only for students academically, but in a true system of supports, they are experiencing school success in behavior, mental wellness, as well as academics, because we're attending to all three of those with the multiple tiers of support that are fluid. We've also learned how effective collaboration, you got to see a couple clips on those, lead to focus, instruction, and meaningful support. And then lastly, how that structured collaboration really is rooted in the academic standards, what students must know and be able to do. And then we use the data from that, the assessments we give, to measure that learning to improve student learning in subsequent instruction. In other words, we use that data then to plan that next step, providing support, intervention, what we must do moving forward so the students progress and demonstrate proficiency on that skill and the next skill. Thoughts on or questions about the three that or the 3 points up here, or questions about the entire time together?
I don't know if I missed this earlier or not, but so when all of this was sort of, RTI, there were rules that apply to each tier and when we would move a student from one tier to another. Can you speak to that as far as MTSS goes? It seems to be much more fluid and subjective, which I'm not sure I'm as comfortable with, but can
Right.
you speak to that?
Absolutely. That the RTI, the response to intervention that we talk about, again, those three letters with MTSS and PLCs, it is essential to have decision rules when students will be moved into a group, out of a group of support. What does tier 2 look like? There has to be a consensus and an understanding within a grade level and within a school of how those decisions are made and what data is used. We want to make sure that as part of those decisions, that tier 2 doesn't become a destination where students land and stay. So we're going to use that data to move them in and out. And so when I say they're fluid or there's a gradient there, Sheila, there are certain rules, definitely certain rules that have to be put in place to make those decisions based on the data. That being said, we're going to make sure that we teach the child and we support the student rather than supporting that tier, being locked into a tier. I don't know if that answers it. I guess decision rules would be the basis for that. Your question, answer to your question. In other words, when do the students move in? When do they move out? And what should that instruction look like? That happens in all three tiers.
But do you agree that there is best practice
Yes.
in creating that structure? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And again, that MTSS is a framework. And for that framework to be successful, then it's going to rely on, as you said, Sheila, those best practices and those decision rules that you as a school come together and put in place as part of that framework.
I mean, I find that I've seen circumstances where I feel like in some cultures, it's almost like an admission of failing. And so students are limboed for far too long. And that's just completely inappropriate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That kind of brings me to the point or the idea of that culture we initially talked about, that culture of student success, because success predicts success and reinforces success. Failure predicts and reinforces failure. And so for students, those supports, that tier 2, those focus supports, intentional supports, are meant to move that student out of that group, not being locked into a group or a tier. Rather, it is the medicine, the temporary medicine, the antibiotic, for example, that is working for that period of time. We're clarifying those misunderstandings, and at the same time providing that core instruction, but working on that specific misunderstanding or lack of ability to do something such as solve a problem, demonstrate something in science. That tier 2 should have a clear goal for a student, and a clear what we should be doing in tier 2 then is providing best practice instruction and monitoring that along the way and making changes if what we're doing is not working. So we're progress monitoring within tier 2. We do that within tier 1, but that progress monitoring is during a much shorter period of time within the supports. It's more often, and we're constantly tracking that to see is that if this is our line for where that we want them to be, here's proficiency in that particular skill. Where are they at any given time? And at what point in our decision rules do we say, okay, after 3 weeks, we're seeing they are not approaching that trend line or that goal. We need to put something else in place. The Supreme Court was really clear on that in their Endra decision. In fact, they said it is required that schools use data for students in the special education, let's say mathematics, it is not only essential that you use that you collect that data, but that you use that data to provide, when providing specially designed instruction, to make changes when they are not performing as desired in light of their unique circumstances. So they were very clear. Supreme Court was very clear on that progress monitoring. And that's not just tier 3 though, that's tier 2. I've seen students locked in groups for a period of time. When I ask, okay, so what's the goal? Where do they need to be at a certain period of time? Do you have a goal? In 5 weeks, this is where we're going to be. In 2 weeks, no, we're just helping them out. You know, we're trying to give them more. That's kind of vague. I want to know exactly in this tier 2 group that we have, what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, and what's your plan for those students, those 3 that you have. Other thoughts? I really appreciate. Here are some resources. I will have this presentation on a Padlet, and I have Sheila. I'm going to make sure I send this to you directly. Sheila, Farrell, who else is on with us today?
Jamie.
Jamie. And okay, and Sarah. I'm going to make sure I send those to you, the slides themselves, just so you can see them. But there will be more resources on the Padlet. And I will, in that email, make sure I send you the Padlet link as well. And then lastly, if you would, to help me in our center, complete the evaluation, if you can just click that, complete that, and then register for any additional trainings. Session number 3 is coming up in, I think, a month, where we will then dig into tier 2 in more depth, going back and remembering what tier 1's about and looking at how those two work together. And that may help. I hope you're on for that, Sheila, because that may help with what we were talking about, you and I and the team. Okay.
I'm signed up for all of it.
Good. Can't wait to, and I really appreciate you being here for the duration. Hopefully this is meaningful. Your time is too precious for me just to babble on and not make it worthwhile. So I'll leave that up for just another minute or so. And I really thank each of you for being here today. And you have my contact information. Please reach out. And if I can do anything for your school, or if our team can do anything for your school, there's no charge to go in and help you with looking at data. I just finished working with 3 districts on their school improvement plans, or 3 schools, and we really dug into their data and looked at curriculum alignment in actually all 3. And that became part of their school improvement goals, was actually digging into the curriculum, making sure their learning targets were actually essential skills rooted learning targets. So be happy to come out. All right. Thank you again. And I wish all of you the best. And if there's nothing else, I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.